Welcome to the Criminal Imagination. This series is not a tale of logic and reason. It is a descent into shadows, secrets, and the crimes that refuse to die. We will uncover the forgotten roots of crime fiction, haunted mansions, unreliable confessions, spectral witnesses, and guilty minds fractured by mirrors and blood. And through this, we will explore how fear, guilt, madness, and supernatural shaped the genre we believed we understood. This is the archive of the repressed. Welcome to Gothic Evidence, Dark Inheritance. A world where justice limps behind secrets, where madness wears a velvet coat, and the blood on the floor tells stories older than law or even time. We often think of horror in terms of haunted houses, murderers in the night, or spectral hands clawing out of graves. But there is another kind of horror, quieter, colder, and infinitely more suffocating. This is a labyrinth of secrets, secrets of the shadows. The state has always prided itself on light, on the belief that nothing can hide from the sun of official record. The archive, the registry, the ledger, the oath, all are meant to expose, to clarify, to set the record straight. And yet, in the margins of those same records, the shadows gather. For what is more Gothic than an authority convinced it sees everything, while in truth it cannot see the ghost in its own mirror? It is a descent into a world where paper is as dangerous as steel, where signatures are more binding than shackles, and where the real sentence is not passed in a courtroom but written quietly in an office at the end of a long corridor. Today we step into the bureaucratic Gothic, the dark architecture of the state's own paranoia, and we will walk its corridors with two unlikely companions. A Scottish theological nightmare dressed as a confession, and a Brazilian satire wearing the uniform of a police sergeant. James Hogg's Confessions of a Justified Sinner begins not in the fog of a graveyard, but in the meticulous prose of an editor, a man who assures us, politely, that his account is rooted in documentation. And yet, this neat framing device is a trap, for the voice that follows, the sinner himself, turns the narrative into a labyrinth of self-justification, supernatural intrusion, and the uneasy suggestion that the state, the church, and the self are locked in an eternal trial from which there is no release. The sinner writes as if he is defending himself before an invisible court, producing his own indictment and absolution in the same breath. But what court is this? Not the Kirk session, not the sheriff's bench, no. This is the more insidious court of public morality, in which reputation is preserved or destroyed not by law, but by the whispering bureaucracy of neighbors, elders, and anonymous pamphleteers. Here, bureaucracy is spectral. It has no central office, only endless network of unseen clerks in human form. And the paperwork? It is the confession itself, pages that will be read, perhaps altered, perhaps even forged, until the truth is indistinguishable from the copy. Across the Atlantic in the streets of 19th century Rio de Janeiro, Manuel Antônio de Almeida offers us Memoirs of a Police Sergeant. On the surface, it is comedic. Its protagonist, Leonardo, climbs through the ranks of the police force by charm, wit, and occasional corruption. But beneath the humor is the same shadow that haunts Hogg's Scotland, a state that operates less like a beacon of justice and more like a carnival mirror, distorting what it sees. Leonardo's authority is not a matter of formal law, but of paperwork. Paperwork that comprises of arrest orders, permits, records of petty infractions. And this lies its horror. Bureaucracy becomes not a neutral machine but a living creature, one that feeds on mistakes, delays, and omissions. And here too, the paperwork itself becomes Gothic, an object that both legitimizes and conceals power, that can vanish, reappear, or be conveniently misplaced in ways more decisive than any court ruling. What unites these two works is their obsession with dual selves. The justified sinner is both devout and damned, victim and perpetrator, protector and predator. In both cases, the self is fractured by the very institution meant to stabilize it. This is bureaucracy as a hall of mirrors, each reflection slightly altered, until one is not certain which version of the self the state will choose to recognize or punish. In the Gothic imagination, the castle is often the locus of terror. But here, the castle has become the registry office, the police station, the clerk's desk. Instead of chains, we have files. Instead of spectres in the hallway, we have names written in ink. Names that can be summoned, accused, erased. And make no mistake, in both Hogg's Scotland and Almeida's Brazil, the apparatus of the state is as capable of haunting as any phantom. Consider the motive of legal overreach. In Hogg's novel, the religious bureaucracy presumes to know the sinner's standing before God, and in doing so, it warps his identity until he no longer knows himself. In Almeida's satire, the police bureaucracy extends its reach into every corner of life, not through brute force, but through the small suffocating gestures of form filling, record sketching, and the quiet rewriting of one's official story. In both, the machinery of power is not loud but quiet, not sudden but gradual. It seeps into life like damp into the walls, until the house is no longer habitable, and yet no collapse can be proven. This is the Gothic horror of paperwork. It kills not with a single stroke, but with 1,000 small annotations. And perhaps this is why bureaucracy lends itself so naturally to paranoia. In the police archives, file may be redacted. But what does that mean? That something dangerous is hidden, or that something inconvenient is missing. In the church records, a confession may be written in the sinner's own hand, but whose hand guided that pen? The state's promise is always one of transparency, but in its shadows, the truth is never fully visible. Hogg's unreliable confession becomes a mirror for the state's own unreliable memory. Almeida's police records become a comedy of errors that masks the tragedy of the powerless. In both, the official version of events is not simply inaccurate, it is actively haunted by what it excludes. Even the motif of the spectral witness, so common in Gothic fiction, takes on a bureaucratic form here. The witness is not a ghost in the night, but a name in a ledger, an initial at the bottom of a page, a testimony that may have been altered after the fact. You cannot confront it, you can only read it. And in reading it, you're already complicit in its reality. And then there is the horror of paperwork. This is not a trivial phrase. Paper is fragile, but in the hands of the state, it becomes more enduring than stone. A rumor may fade, a memory may distort, but a file, once written, can be summoned decades later as if no time has passed. The past is never past, it is only waiting in the cabinet. And perhaps if you open that cabinet, you will find that the papers inside have been rearranged, or that one crucial page has been replaced entirely. In the Gothic crime imagination, the body is often the site of evidence, a wound, a mark, a missing limb. But here, the evidence is disembodied, reduced to handwriting, signatures, stamps. Identity itself becomes a kind of document, and to lose control of that document is to lose oneself. Hogg's sinner writes his confession as if it will save him, but it becomes the very thing that condemns him. Almeida's sergeant uses his records to rise in power, but the same machinery could turn against him without warning. Both remind us that in the bureaucratic Gothic, the greatest crime is not the act committed in the world, but the act committed on paper. Surveillance is the inevitable companion to bureaucracy. A file is only as powerful as the system that feeds it. In both novels, the characters live under an invisible gaze. No, it's not the gaze of God, but that of the state. The state, its clerks, its officers. This gaze is fragmentary, sometimes absent, sometimes overwhelming, but always ready to reappear when it is least convenient. And because it is partial, it produces not certainty but suspicion. This is the paradox at the heart of the Gothic state. It watches you without fully seeing you, and in that gap between attention and blindness, paranoia blooms. Are you being observed? Has your name been entered in a register? Was that a clerk you saw at the corner of the street, or only someone who looked like him? And in that paranoia lies the Gothic's most unsettling suggestion, that perhaps the state does not need to see everything. It only needs you to believe it might. The effect is the same. You will police yourself. You will draft your own confession. You will guard your shadow as carefully as your flesh. Fear, guilt, madness. These are not the only products of supernatural haunting, but of bureaucratic haunting. The office is not immune to the Gothic. It is its perfect breeding ground. Every drawer is a potential reliquary. Every sealed envelope is a coffin for a truth that will never be exhumed. And so, in Confessions of a Justified Sinner and Memoirs of a Police Sergeant, we find not merely stories of individuals, but stories of systems. Systems that survive precisely because they are intangible, because their greatest powers are exercised in the quiet of a desk, in the shadow of a filing cabinet. If the Gothic castle imprisons the body, the Gothic bureaucracy imprisons the self. And perhaps that is the greater crime, a crime without a crime scene, a murder without a corpse, a sentence without a trial. The question then is not whether these systems are corrupt, but whether they can be anything else. Can an archive truly be neutral when the act of keeping a record is also the act of choosing what not to record? Can a confession ever be trusted when the authority receiving it already knows what it wishes to hear? And so here I must leave you with an uneasier question still, one that will linger after the video ends. If the state's power lies in the shadows of its own paperwork, then in whose hand is the pen that writes your story? Until next time, keep your confessions hidden, your records untampered, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is not the crime you commit, but the file with your name on it.